sure it is better. Anyway, so this is Ockenden report 2022. There were some useful recommendations, some less useful, I think. So staff who work together must train together. I think that's a real overarching principle, and that has been done well. However, what I'm concerned about is that there's this issue of compounded harm, and you're seeing this, I think, with the mesh stuff here, where our families. So if you think about South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, if you apply those principles to this, well, there might be a bit of truth, but we still don't really understand what happened at unit level. And the second bit is there's no reconciliation. There's anger and bitterness and grief that just hasn't been resolved. And so it's having this kind of compounded harm where we're now, there's a criminal police investigation for 4 of the consultants. It's now very difficult to recruit to Shrewsbury and Telford. And maternity services more broadly are reputationally damaged by the rippling out of this kind of compounded harm. So what do we need to do? HSIB, I don't know if it's the Health Service Investigation Branch. So all cases of HIE essentially are now investigated centrally by the Health Safety Investigation Branch. There are many, many issues. One is that the entry criteria were cooling, therapeutic hypothermia, but in units in the UK, if you're a big unit, you cool more babies than small units because you can. So proportionally, big units seem to have a lot more poor outcomes than small units because we cool a lot more babies because there's no threshold for cooling. Secondly, there's a real issue with unregulated experts, that people just give an opinion, there's no peer review, and if you saw it in the Health Service Journal, they criticized HSIB for Rasputin-like characters, giving these kind of overarching. I can name a few for Jason if you like afterwards. And so what we're left with is this kind of report soup where we have multiple agencies, some kind of quite low quality reports with no academic rigor or oversight. And the standard trope for all is just to recommend training. Going to make you a better person by training you better. Just going to make you better. And last year, 2019, there were more than 1,000 recommendations just for intrapartum care. And so now in the UK, we've got a clearinghouse for recommendations. But why don't we go upstream and have less recommendations? Then you wouldn't need a clearinghouse for recommendations. Then the unit's then criticized for not implementing 1,000 recommendations, and there's no kind of local prioritization, support, or funding because not everyone has the same issues. Not everyone has those 1,000 issues. So it's really poor. And if you look at Carl McRae, who I think is one of the best thinkers in this space in the UK, he's an organizational psychologist, and he says we collect too much, we do too little. And I thought, what's Elvis's greatest contribution to quality improvement? A little less conversation, a little more action, please. I think we could all agree with that. And I think one of the issues we have is we're constantly looking at poor outcomes to try and work out how to be better. And the point I make about that is, okay, there's no point asking me why I'm a terrible runner to work out how good to be a good runner. You say, oh yeah, okay, Tim, don't be 58 and overweight. That's how you get it. Okay, that doesn't tell you how to be a good runner. It tells you how you might be a bad runner. So should you ask Usain Bolt? But equally, you've got to make sure you get the right bits because, Usain Bolt is not a good runner because he eats 100 chicken McNuggets a day. In fact, well, there are probably some hormones that help with that, I think, in 100 chicken McNuggets. But actually, that's not the secret ingredient of how to be a good runner. So we've got to make sure you get the active ingredients of kind of what we're doing. So one of the things we did was kind of have a look at, okay, what makes a maternity unit safe? There are many, many issues which you could all recognize. Most professional training is a very useful intervention as well as training because it improves some of the social, organizational, cultural factors. However, quality improvement cannot improve staffing or the physical environment. And I think we've got to just be careful about how we talk about this. And just to quickly, I just spent Monday with Andy Simpson, previous CMO, I think, of New Zealand, who is a lovely man, and Joe Whaling, who's one of the researchers in restorative justice. And what they're saying is, okay, can we reduce some of this compounded harm, this kind of rippling out effect? And can we restore relationships? Because those people are still going to have to go to their local hospital one day and be cared for. You can't go to a complete different part of the country, very uncommonly anyway. So can we kind of restore these relationships? And they felt that the mesh issues you're seeing now would be much worse if they hadn't addressed it in a restorative way. Now, I think that's to be discussed. And the actual intervention, what is it that kind of makes a difference? I think that's got to be crystallized out. But it seems to be sort of facilitation. And I think we're going to definitely have a look at that in the UK. So the Odon device, I just showed you one. That's it looking at its very best. Okay. Fascinatingly, 78% of women approached to take part in a study of the Odon device in an emergency consented. And almost to a woman, they said, if this stops other people having forceps in the future, I'll do it. Now, what was extraordinary, I don't know if you know the story of Odon, Jorge Odon, the Argentinian car mechanic who invented it in Buenos Aires. Yeah, and then he had this thing about how do you get a cork out of an empty wine bottle? You kind of pull it out with a plastic bag, essentially. And he thought, so they did, I think they did 25 or so deliveries with the prototype of it in Argentina, all multips, all OA, all pushing normally, just about to have a normal birth, and it works really well in that situation. Then, yeah, in fact, it's a race to get it on in time. Yeah. And then WHO did a study and really struggled to recruit, at least partly because they chose units that would benefit hugely from this, like Jomo Kenyatta Hospital in Nairobi. But out of 17,500 births a year, they do 10 instrumentals. 10, not 10%, 10, less than one a month, out of 17,500.
Younger, slimmer.
No, they do sections for the second stage, mate. You know, it's it's nice of you to think the best. You're not as jaded as me.
No.
Strange they don't. I don't think so. So we did 3,000 simulations to kind of work out what happened. Yeah, was it going to be useful? Was it not going to be useful? Then we did first assist was the first 40. Then we did another 140 in Bristol. Then assist Besançon was 140 in a quite a unit in France, well known for instrumentals. And if you look at the Cochrane vacuum, it's about 65%, but most units would be slightly higher for Ventouse than 65%. But it was 72% successful and 88-90% in France. Now you might think, well, just French are better obstetricians. That's possible. It's definitely possible. But they also expedite the second stage after 20 minutes pushing. And they think we are Calvinist barbarians for doing anything other than that.
They also fund pelvic health physiotherapy for all women.
Yeah, they said they had a 1% third-degree tear rate, but then Rani Thakkar sent me a paper saying that 80% of third-degree tears are missed in France. So yeah,
Probably why they need the physio.
Yeah, would have had a normal birth. Correct. So that's how I sleep at night, Jenny, is not that they're younger, better-looking obstetricians than me, but actually the practice is different. And I always make the slightly fey joke. Women across the world are the same. It's just the obstetricians who are different. I mean, the use of oral ergometrin to keep your blood pressure up postnatally is not big in the UK. It is certainly used in some countries in Europe. That's not why we left Europe, Jenny. Okay. Now we had some concerns at Southmead that our third-degree tear rate was about 7%, which is definitely higher than the background rate for Ventouse. Now we think, okay, these are the first 320 ever done for clinical indications. So one of the things we're concerned about is we don't really understand the technique yet. So one of the big issues we had was it took us a while to work out that you had to put it on during a contraction. Otherwise, it just pushes the head right out of the pelvis. Do you see what I mean? The big advantage was not a mark on a baby. And women were extremely positive about that. Plus, for obstetricians, it's the same application for all positions, OA, OT, and OP. It didn't work at the spines, but worked +1 and below. Now, many places in the world wouldn't do an instrumental at the spines anyway. The neonatologists almost can't understand why we think we should do a randomized trial, because they think, Tim, so they did neonatal pain scores on all the infants in both Bristol and Besançon. And the pain scores were the same as a normal vaginal birth without instruments, and much better than Ventouse and forceps. Interestingly, in France, all babies get paracetamol after an instrumental, whereas us Calvinist barbarians don't do that. And actually, we published a paper. Women were very happy with the study because I think at least partly because you had a research midwife who's there for your birth, who looked after you afterwards, who phoned you up to make sure you're okay as part of the study. And you could argue that should be standard postnatal care. But yeah, so women were very positive about it. And almost to a woman, they said, I want a safer, kinder alternative for assisted vaginal birth. And in fact, we published a paper just on in BMJ Open, I think it is, just on women's views of both the trial and the experience of being in a trial. And NIHR then used that as for one of their case studies to show, okay, maybe we're just as paternalistic about research in labor as we are care in labor. Maybe we should ask women more often what they want to do. So it's now been taken up. Harvard Business School have now taken it up, and they want to do some wider feasibility studies. And they're very keen on this model of, and Auckland may be interested in it, very keen on working with national centers to support them to implement it, get confident with it, understand how to use it. And then that national center becomes the center for that country to teach the rest of the country. Now, obviously, when I said that in Christchurch, they said they'd never heard of Auckland and looked no further. But I did say, yeah, I was coming here next. So anyway, have a think about it. It won't be next year, but it might be in the future. Now, okay, so this is, again, something just as an example of kind of what we've been doing. One of the things that's becoming increasingly clear to us in the UK is it's very difficult to learn enough open surgery to feel confident as a consultant in your 7 years as a trainee, because no one does anything open anymore. In fact, almost obstetrics is the last home of open surgery. So what we did was then try and work out, could we work with Anne Shams in Cairo, which is, I think, 15,000 births a year, 55 AIPs a month. If you have a very high parity and a very high section rate, guess what happens? Now, 55 AIPs a month is a lot easier to get some concentrated experience than, hanging around hoping you might see one in Bristol. So what we did was one of our trainees went over to there for 3 weeks. One of their trainees came over to us. If you work in the UK and you're an overseas graduate, you double your chance of passing part 3 if you work for 2 or 3 weeks in the UK, because you speak the language of the exam. You understand the language of the exam. Doesn't make you a better doctor, just makes you better at the exam. So people were very keen on that. We had a structured syllabus both sides. Cameron presented it at Congress, very, very popular. But a lot of people saying, well, okay, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't you working with us in Pakistan? Why aren't you working with us in India? Why aren't you working with us in South Africa? Cameron's observations were that the SHOs were much more confident at cesarean section than and ST7s. They had a much better anatomical training. They hardly did any assisted vaginal births. That was an issue, and maybe we could kind of help them with that. And he also said that for the first week, when you book an Uber in Cairo to get to the hospital, it sends you the registration in Arabic, which he didn't find that useful because he didn't have no idea what it said. So there were a few issues. When they came here, when their trainee came to us, they definitely got ready for part 3. They definitely understood systems and structure, and they were very, very taken aback by patient information, how we kind of talk to people about how we organize a system. I think that's what the NHS and systems like the NHS are good at, is systems and structure. So the next step is we're actually probably going to have an obstetric surgery ATSM at the RCOG. In Toronto, they have an obstetric surgery fellowship where they just do AIPs, very high BMIs, they have a big referral center coming in. And
you might not be familiar with AIP as an acronym.
Oh, abnormally invasive placenta, which is the trendy acceptable term for accretor, percretor, incretor. Yeah, sorry. I was just trying to be trendy. You know.
You're ahead of us. That's all you need to know. That's all you
It
want to
used to
know
be called
when you
PAS,
come
yeah,
to Colonies.
PIS, yeah. Yeah, no, it's take it from me, it's coming on, it's going forward. So can we actually help some trainees get a broader experience? Now, the reason we did it for 3 weeks is because it's very difficult. So I worked in Cape Town for a year, worked in France for a bit, worked in Sweden for a bit. But in those days, it's very easy to come out of training. It's very, very easy. Now it's very difficult because everyone needs to have everyone around. But most people, even with young kids, could come out for 2 or 3 weeks. That was the kind of idea. So we've got to think, how do we fund this? How do we incorporate it into everyday training? And how do we make it safe for all parties? So interesting. I think we need to think about it. Okay, this is about obstetric care more generally. I don't know if anyone knows the Fetal Medicine Foundation Asprey algorithm for placental dysfunction, but it's a very, very impressively validated algorithm for placental dysfunction, and the QUIP algorithms, Andy Shannon's algorithms for preterm labor. One of the problems at the moment, I don't know if it's an issue here, is at the moment in the UK, we make 50% of people high risk to find 80% of the problems. So almost everyone is high risk. So every 39-year-old we treat exactly the same. Doesn't matter if you've had 2 normal births and you're a county netball player, or it's your first pregnancy, you had IVF and your BMI is 50. We treat you exactly the same. And there's no real serious risk assessment. Now, we are confident if you could implement those 2 algorithms, we could find the same 80% of poor outcomes in 10% of the population. So we could de-escalate care for 40% of the population. Now, at that point, you can focus obstetric care and resource. And I don't know how you talk about aspirin here in Antenatal Clinic, but we have this very casual, yeah, take some aspirin. Yeah, probably be all right. Definitely no harm. Yeah, take it when you remember it. And if you identify, so that's the app, that's how it's going to work. You're going to be assessed, yeah, as you go. And so it's also going to have, so let's say at 36 weeks, if you're high risk for placental dysfunction, but actually your baby's normally grown, we probably would recommend induction labor at 39 weeks. Whereas actually women who are not high risk for placental dysfunction may have more of an option to continue as they wish. So we can use it for many things. That's how we're going to kind of use it. It's being rolled out at the moment. These are the original data. These are some data from St. George's from a single unit using the stuff. And so reduce preeclampsia by 25%, reduce FGR by 40%. And of course, that's nothing to do with risk assessment. The reason those 2 are reduced is because you say to women, you're definitely going to benefit from aspirin. You definitely need 150 milligrams at night, and we're going to kind of police it. Do you see what I mean? So it's actually about focusing your resource and attention on those women who are going to benefit the most. But what we're most excited about, albeit, you know, it's a single unit, it's an interrupted time series, it looks as if it completely eliminates ethnic disparities. Now, what we do know in the UK is that ethnic disparity is a massive issue. Now, we can talk about candidacy. Okay, there's a whole many things that contribute to that. but maybe improved risk assessment and much more personalized care is one way of addressing that. Now, women can have this app on their phone. We will have it on the hospital computers. It's currently being rolled out. We've just got some funding from the NHR artificial intelligence program. And we're rolling out in 4 units now. It's going to be 20 units next year. And we are looking for collaborators. Ben Bopp, the Ransco president, is rolling it out in the Sunshine Coast, I think, same app, to see if it works in Australia. So you may know a bit more. Okay, ABC, I talked to you about impact fetal head. Okay, one of the things we are also going to do is try and have a think about intrapartum fetal monitoring. One of the problems we have is everyone tries to find a technical problem and try and adjust the machines, but maybe it's not the machines that's the big issue. So we're trying to find technical solutions to socio-technical problems. And this is, I give it absolute credit. This is Kathy Winter's line. Kathy Winter said, okay, we've got to stop asking the question, is the CTG okay? And start asking the question, is the baby okay? Because there's more to the baby okay than a thin line on a graph. And now you're all going to be absolutely amazed to find out this breaking news that things that contribute to poor outcomes are small gestational age, meconium, pyrexia, failure to progress. Now, can we improve support? So you're not allowed to say shared decision making in the UK because the decision is not shared, so it's supported decision making. Luckily, I'm here to help you with this new language. So what we've done is we did a massive piece of work, consensus workshop. We interviewed 500 staff. We had this big consultation with women and birth partners. We reviewed the clinical definition, did a systematic review. So, for example, what's the definition of meconium? Okay, we all know it is, and everyone goes, oh, it's significant meconium. Well, you've already made a judgment. Okay, is that thin, thick, 1, 2, 3, or is it just meconium, no meconium? Probably going that way. Now we modeled this tool. So this is a tool where you combine the 4 risk factors with the CTG. And so, for example, it's kind of probably what you do every day, but you say, okay, this lady in room 3, she's not really making progress in labor. She's got a small baby, and now she's got a temperature. Unless the CTG is balmed or normal, what are we doing? Because one of the problems of CTGs, which I don't think we wear enough, is a normal CTG very predictive, a bradycardia very predictive. Everything in between, slightly subjective, let's be honest. So we're trying to incorporate context with the CTG to support decision making and make it as basic as possible. Now, we have done some modeling. We did a whole piece of modeling and showed that if you incorporated those 2 things together, so risk factors and the CTG, you would have, on average, delivered the baby 2 hours before the baby was delivered, and mostly by the same mode of birth. So if it was an emergency section, you would have done it 2 hours before. If it was vaginal birth, you might have expedited the vaginal birth 2 hours before. So anyway, that's a big piece of work. We're trying to work out how to escalate usefully. I think you could probably summarize this slide in there's 3 issues of escalation. 1, you don't know there's a problem. 2, you don't know the system for a process for escalation. And 3, you're too frightened to escalate. Because now you probably don't have that. I mean, can I say I've been extremely impressed by how polite people are at domestic flights here in New Zealand. That has been, I've had to reflect on how horrible I am after everyone being so pleasant. It was just embarrassing. Anyway, so can we improve escalation? Yes, we can. We'll talk about that. Can we support decision making? And one of the things, when we listened to women about this, what was very interesting was some women said, I want you to tell me every single bit of what you know about this. And other women said, you're a professional, I want you to help me, tell me what to do. And there was everything in between. And so one of the key issues we're going to have is how do we surface that and ask an open question to begin with? And this is the sort of stuff. So we've got this idea of conversation starts. So we have just standard narrative. Say, okay, we're going to do this in labour. What do you want to do? Do you want to do it with me? Yeah, that's the midwife, not me. You're looking at me as if I'm a really nice guy. I'm definitely not a nice guy. Now, the other thing that you might find interesting at some point down the line, the RCOG keeps telling government we need more obstetricians, and the government says, that's nice. How many more do you need? And the RCOG goes, I don't know, quite a few. Because there is no way of calculating how many obstetricians you need. So Joe Mountfield, this is Joe Mountfield's work. Birth Rate Plus, I don't know if you ever have you used Birth Rate Plus here. It's a tool that works out acuity and volume to work out how many midwives you need. So how many births you have and how complicated they are. And there's a way of working out how many midwives you have. Now we need the same for obstetricians so that regulators can then say, you need that many obstetricians. You're short on obstetricians. You need to the managers need to sort that out. Now, it's going to be worked out on what units with good outcomes, what's their staffing, how do we do that? There's a bit of sort of stuff to do. My only concern is if it comes out with a low number, we're going to have to wear that low number forever. So how do we work out correct staffing? That's something we need to do, have a think about. So just to summarize, okay, report soup needs to be addressed. There's a lot happening at the RCOG at the moment, I'll say that. And we're very interested in collaboration. So if you wanted to collaborate, I'd be delighted. Now, I was just going to do two tiny things. Okay, one of the successes the college has had, and maybe Ranscog would benefit the same, is how do you engage with politicians? You know, because sometimes we go, oh no, I hate politicians, they're grubby and horrible, and you know, they're political. Okay, don't be surprised if politicians don't do what you think is best if you never speak to them. And I think we've got to engage with politicians in a much more constructive, useful way. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know.
If people aren't nice to you.
Yeah, I mean, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised, you know, exactly. So one of the things we've been having to think about at the RCG, which is at professional body level, you're kind of in the system. How do you engage and influence? And I think you've got to understand, harness their drivers. I think you've got to speak the language of funders. So for example, for shoulder dystocia training in the UK, we identified that NICE will fund any drug that costs less than £25,000 of quality. We did some work that showed that by preventing brachial plexus injuries after shoulder dystocia training, that would cost £12,000 of quality. So if that were a drug, we would fund it for everyone. And policymakers go, oh, in that case, we probably should fund that. I'll see what you're saying. Because they have no framework except the existing framework. So we've got to be able to speak that language and not just hold our nose and say, God, they're too stupid to understand what we're saying. We've got to make an effort to speak their language. Secondly, I think the big step forward for the RCOG is actually providing a plausible collaboration, which was both colleges, the Royal College of Midwives, the Royal College of Obstetricians, and a group of social scientists and industry. And actually, because you can't expect just the RCOG to change these things. And that's why government funders were not that interested in just RCOG initiatives. Now, if you can secure funding, it's actually one of the things people really like is possible matched funding, but you don't have to put cash on the table. You say, I'm going to put this much time in to match it. Yeah, governments really like that. And I say deliver, which we have done for Impact Fetal Head, and we're going to have a go for the fetal surveillance stuff. And once governments are committed to that, they almost have to keep committing. Yeah, that's their program. So they could say, well, it never really worked, I'm not going to do it. Or, okay, let's have a look at this nationally and have a serious think about it. So it sounds so out of our hands when you're at the coalface. But I think as a profession and as a group of professionals, I think we've got to be slightly more focused on how we could help politicians understand. Now, I know that you've changed DHBs and stuff over the weekend or something, but you know, yeah, I don't know what the new name is, but no, neither does anyone, as far as I can work out. Yeah. Anyway, and yeah, if you want to come to the college, come to the college. That's it. That's what's happening in the UK.
Thank you.
And if you wanted to have a go of any of those things, then yeah, let us know.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
No worries.
I'll just double check that there's no wee comments in the chat. I suspect we have lost people through the morning. I just wanted to
thanks
add
very
one
much.
little point that struck me with the Tommy's app
Yeah.
was that we used to, back in the day, individualize care for a patient sitting in front of us. And then we moved to widespread guidelines where we threw aspirin at everyone with this condition. And it's interesting to see the pendulum swing back towards more personalized care for benefit, actually at a population level.
Have you ever heard Back to the Future?
Yeah. Michael J. Fox, lovely man. Thank
So
you very much.
I mean, but the problem is how do we I could stop sharing possibly. One of the problems is how do we make it, I always say, how do we make it easy to do the right thing? Now, in fact, the Asprey algorithm only requires blood pressure, 3 demographics, age, BMI, ethnicity, and your PAP-A from your first trimester screening. So, but actually you can't do it in your head, but everyone has a computer in their pocket. And I think, how do we democratize this kind of stuff and make it as available as possible? Now, interestingly, when we talk about the Singaporeans, they were saying, oh, that's a great system. So that'd be really popular in Singapore private practice because you can put all the placental dysfunction and preterm labors into the hospital. Whereas we would go, that's community midwifery. Yeah, do you see what I mean? So I think there's some really important things about, but if you put the woman at the center of this, it's about what's the right care for her. And at the moment, I think our tools we use for that are too blunt. And that's why, I was in clinic, there was someone crying as I came out of the door. And the midwife had her arm around her and said, don't worry, darling, everyone's high risk now. And you think that's where we are. That is where we are, So, could we be more sophisticated in the 21st century? I think we have to be. So yes, I agree. It's a very long way of saying thank you. Yes, I agree.
Any other questions or comments in the chat? Otherwise, I think we might need to draw things to a close, but I believe that Tim is going to be speaking with the registrars this afternoon. Is that right?
And I will actually send a thing out on Silo. Tim is hosting a gathering for fellows at 7 o'clock, actually at Park Place.
Well, you're hosting it. Yeah.
We're slightly dismayed by COVID, so if anybody wants to catch up with Tim later on, for some beers, then I'll send out the address and details. There'll be a warm fire
and thank you very much to the people who have been able to join, and a special thank you in people manning the wards who haven't been able to join us.